So this is going to be the first episode of our podcast of Life as Is. And we thought it'd be helpful to introduce ourselves. We'll also explain how and why we came together. We'll share a little bit more about our title, which is Life as Is Developmental Ramblers. Why we're doing a podcast, because there's plenty of podcasts out there. So why would you listen to this one? And what can you expect? So Archana, do you want to start with who we are, who you are?
Sure. Who am I? Okay, so in the context of this podcast, I am a recently graduated PhD scholar, you can say, and the topics of my PhD included well-being. So not just well-being as we understand, but the complexity that comes with managing well-being. And also vertical development, which is how the adults develop once we reach the stage of adolescence. Many of us understand when children start growing, they grow in different stages and then they become adolescents and then become adults. And the conventional idea is that once we become adults, then that's it. But there is this whole field of work in psychology, in developmental psychology, that talks about how adults grow. So I use that part for my PhD and well-being. And since then, what I have noticed is I just simply didn't finish a PhD. I also started work on myself in that process. So, and that really helped me grow. That helped me look back at who I was, what I am becoming, and where I can get to if I continue this development. And along that journey, Sytske came along and we did a course together. And she and I have this vertical development in common, and also a lot of other things in common, which we started exploring and finding out. And we started scheduling these conversations with each other and started growing together. And then one fine day, she and I, we almost simultaneously had this thought about, well, if we are growing so much during these conversations, how wonderful would that be to share this, to take it outside of this, to the dual conversation, to, multiple sort of views and perspectives coming in, people joining us and taking it further. So there we are, Sytske.
So I had to unmute. Let me just, before I speak, do something with the light, because I can either cut this out or...
And I'll just do this, do not disturb, because there'll be this tring sound all the time. Yeah, okay.
Okay, I think I'm a little bit lighter. It's probably not the best lighting, but that's okay. So I came across vertical development. Maybe that's where I start, because that's what connected us. In 2006, I met some people at a presencing workshop from Otto Scharmer, and they told me about vertical development. I never heard about it, and I was fascinated by it. So in 2007, I did my first ever workshop on vertical development. And it kept my interest, but it was more sort of in the back of my mind. I did some coaching around my own development in that time. I met some other people who were interested in that. And I always had it as a lens on the world and the work I do. So I work in organizational development, have worked in large organizations, run my own business. But it's sort of came in and out of view. And I didn't really actively use it. Then in 2023, was it in 2023 that we met? Yes, I've forgotten now. It was only 6 years ago. I was working for an organization and I felt it was time to do some further development. And I was wondering what's the next thing I'm interested in. I used to be a development junkie, so I did lots of different things, 2 coaching programs. I did a master's in organizational analysis, and I felt I haven't done anything. It's time for something again. And somehow developmental work came into view again. And that's how I joined the foundations of developmental work with GLA. That's how we met. And I truly enjoyed both re-looking at this material and especially actually our inquiry sessions and our sessions where we deepened that learning. And so happy that we kept that going, even though there was a little hiatus, but then we found each other again. And yeah, I've been struck by how we grow through these sorts of conversations. And as I was thinking about it this morning, I thought, but isn't it vain in a little bit to put out a podcast and to say, oh, look at us talking to each other and learn from that. And maybe it is, and we'll find out how people feel about that. But we will enjoy them. We will learn from them and grow from them. And I think there's something about being open and sharing that can also help us grow in a different way, because it's different if you open up to if you hold it to yourselves. And today, as you can maybe see by my outfit, I'm also coming to you as a horsewoman. I've just been putting the horses out in the field. I've got a fence to mend later on. So that's also part of me, having horses and taking care of those.
And Sytske, there's just one thing that came to my mind that I know when we talk about growth and development, there is also this voice that says, well, why is growth important? What if I don't want to grow? What if I don't want to develop? And of course, on one hand, it's completely up to us. On the other, it's not up to us. So, when life throws us challenges, and we don't know how to grow, and we don't have supporting environment for us to grow and manage those challenges, that's when we start to struggle, and we feel that challenge to a point where we are like trying to swim, but we are drowning, and there's no one out there. So that's one of the reasons why I think growth is important. But the other more important reason is through my own personal experience. So if I look back myself 5 years ago, when I thought like formally this kind of deliberate development started happening for me, I am becoming a person who is more joy to be around, who's more helpful, who is more compassionate, who is actually making her vicinity a better place for everyone. So then when I realized that, I thought, for me, objectively speaking, growth has been better, not worse. So that's something I also wanted to share, because I know there are some voices that talk about growth being elitist, or why should everyone develop and we can choose not to develop. I think sometimes we can, if our environment is just stable, there is no challenge in our environment, then maybe not, and maybe we are fine. But growing and developing helps others. And to me, in my mind, that's good enough reason for me to continue this journey.
Yeah, and I think as I listen to that, I'm thinking, because I was thinking, well, I don't always grow, or it doesn't always benefit others. So I had an interaction this week where I really felt that I failed someone, and I didn't actually deliver on how I've grown. And that's part of it too, right? So we do grow, but it doesn't mean we'll do everything right. And I think growth, when we talk about vertical development, and we'll say a little bit about that later, but it's not about I know more or I'm better, but it's really through I understand myself better, I understand what happens, and through that, as you say, it can bring more joy. And it can also bring more disappointment when we're not living up to who we want to be. I heard Ken Wilber once say that, if you grow, the heights might be higher, but the depths may also be deeper. You feel things even more. So yeah, for me, that's indeed also part of it. And it's never to say that where we are right now is not right. It's just to say there's something beyond that. And unlike, for instance, in an economy where growth also means more resources, growing ourselves personally doesn't always need more resources. Because it can happen in this conversation. It can happen as we go about our daily life. It's not something that always wants us to go on a program or to go and do something. That's how we happen to meet, but actually just doing these conversations helped us grow. So I think it's also, what does growth mean, that it's important that we're clear on that.
Yeah, and I think in our society, growth has been, given quite an importance, but how we understand growth is also another thing. So you and I, we can say we are very privileged to call ourselves highly educated, if I can say that. Very, very highly educated, been to many, wonderful institutions and learned. But those learnings, I would say, were more expanding my world externally. So I was learning about more things. I was learning and getting trained in kind of like knowing that these things exist. But then this particular growth has started expanding my inner world more. So I feel a deeper sense of awareness. I feel like I'm absolutely aware in any given moment now compared to any other time. So if I am in a room full of people, rather than losing myself completely in that notion, I'm still trying to kind of be with my feeling, be with my emotion, and being aware. And that awareness actually brings a certain quality of my thought, certain quality of my decision making. I believe that all these things have been helping me and others around me for sure. So growth in this sense is slightly different, but in the outcome of a growth, that something better will come or something more improved or refined will come. I think this also does that.
So I'm just going to shift something because I get very annoyed by my own lighting. Okay. And we'll just cut this out. I just had an idea of what might help. I don't know if it does, but let's see. Helps a little bit. What? Yeah, I've done videos here before and it's been better, but this might be better.
The sun's angle, now that it's changing.
Yeah, there is no sun, so that's not maybe, I don't know. Maybe I turn on this as well. Oh, I think I did this. Helping? Yes. That might be better.
Yep.
It's okay.
Yep.
The other part will just be dark.
So talk
go to the next piece. I think we've spoken about growth. We've spoken about who we are. Why we come together?
Yeah. Why we came together? Yeah, I would like to hear it from you.
You would like to hear it from me.
Yes, from you.
So why are we coming together? So we've been having these talks. We spoke about how they were, I mentioned this, developmental rumblings. And I was reminded of the BBC program where people go on a walking tour and they talk to each other. And it's a little bit rambling. There's always a theme, but there's something beautiful about just listening to these people talk about their life, about what's important to them, or whatever it might be that they're talking about. And that's how our conversations felt. Like of course, we were in our homes when we had the last ones, mostly. You're in Doha, I was in Melbourne. But it felt like we were going on a walk together in a way, the way we went through whatever was happening in your life, in my life, the questions we had. So when you sent me a message, I think you sent me a message, right? And said, yes, I had this dream. Let's do a podcast together. I immediately said yes. And I had this sense that I've been thinking about what could we do with this? What else would be possible? And is there anything we can give from these sessions? Now, as we've been developing this idea, I love the idea of doing this together. As I said, even if nobody listens, I'll be fine because we'll be having great conversations and we'll be learning more. There's a little voice in me that thinks, oh, isn't this arrogant? And then I think, well, who are we not to share this? right? So there's so many people sharing their conversations, and people may be interested, people may not be interested, as long as, in a way, I don't care about that or am not invested in that. I think that will be absolutely fine. And it'll just be a joy for us to have these conversations, but to give some more structure maybe to them.
Yes.
So that's for me why we came together.
Yeah. And I think if I can extend that, absolutely, the conversations that you can have with anyone at any time about anything, that's one kind of conversation. And the conversations that we have been having are almost, they feel organic and yet somehow very deliberate in some ways. So when we talk about them, one of the themes, one of the undercurrent I feel is we speak from our heart. So we don't feel like I have to agree with Sytske or Sytske has to agree with me about anything. I've been thinking about something or reflecting on something, and I just share. And then she shares her perspective. And in that sharing of perspective, somewhere I can reflect on my thought or on my views about that topic, learn something and grow. So that has been happening. And I don't think any and every conversation always allow that to happen. So I think it's in those undercurrent or the underlying sort of outcomes that we were also watching over time that we thought that it's worthy of taking it a little bit broader. So I thought in that sense, the conversations were a little bit more designed to make us think and push that pause button that a lot of times we don't. We just go about living and doing things. So we are mostly, I think, always doing one thing after the other, and then the day ends and we go off to bed. Whereas these conversations I thought was more about being and becoming, which is a little bit different qualitatively than doing. Doing is also important, but I feel like we do less of these kind of conversations in our day-to-day life. So something that I felt was very special to me.
Love that. So they're about being and becoming. And I think you're right. We do less of them in our daily life. And I think one of my aims in my work, and in life as well, but that can be harder because we, as you say, we just get swallowed up by life. But it's to have more of these and to in our work in organizations as well, to think about how am I being here? Who am I becoming? What's happening? And to reflect on that. And I love the idea of, we're pressing the pause button. But also, I think what we're doing is we're mining our days that have gone by and our experiences, and finding out the stuff that we did like. What can we learn from that? But also the things that we really didn't like. The lead that can become gold. The nuggets that have learning in them that might have felt like failing, but actually they're an opportunity to learn, or they're an opportunity to reframe or to see the world differently. And sometimes it's almost through the conversation, through retelling the story and you asking me a question or me telling it in a different way, that I learned from that, and that it might have been a not pleasant experience in that time, or it might even have been almost like irrelevant. I may not have paid attention to it, but then through the conversation, it might become something that I learn from or grow from, or refrain from. So yeah, I love that. And I think our invitation in this podcast is for others to also take up those conversations. So to be in that conversation with us. I'll be very curious to what people will be asking us, what they'll be sharing with us. We talked about maybe even from time to time hosting a conversation where we join with people who are listening to the podcast online and have that conversation, to see, what might people take from that they can bring into their life about being and becoming.
Yeah, and I also recall a moment when I was sending you messages about a particularly challenging episodes where I had to respond, to someone who who has more power seemingly in this situation. And the way you explained and the way you gave me support, and you just kind of like teased out different aspects of what was happening, I think that also helped me, because sometimes we do feel like we have all it takes to respond to someone or say something. And yet I think it does help to sound it out to someone who would understand without judging. They'll just lay out their perspective to you. Whether you take it or not, it's totally up to you. And I feel like that freedom is priceless. The freedom to not having to agree, I think make me grow more, because on one hand, I know that there are these different perspectives and I'm not bound by any. And then I'm like kind of taking it and going on. So the reason why I mentioned this is for our audience also, if there are some things that they are confused about or having dilemmas or whatever, these are also the conversations where we can include that in, and then, just talk about how I see it, how you see it, or any other member of the audience sees it. And I think it would be a wonderful forum to share not just ideas wanting others to adopt them, but just a perspective to see what others think about the same thing, because we see things differently, right? That's the whole idea about vertical development. And so it'll be wonderful. And I mean, quite selfishly looking forward to growing more with, multiple perspectives. So that's where I'm coming from.
And I think that adds something for me as well. So a lot of the podcasts I'm listening to at the moment are about politics. And I love them. And at the same time, because they're trying to, I normally have to look for the Dutch word, but now I'm looking for the English word, which is quite interesting. They're trying to make meaning or make sense of what's happening. And sometimes I feel there could be even more underneath that. There could be a conversation about the conversation we're having. So, for instance, without going into the detail of it, but if I look at politics in the US at the moment around the elections, but also the politics in the Netherlands, I think there is a narrative that lies underneath what we're already talking about. That we could still have conversations around as a society. And it feels in our conversations, we've been able to go there a little bit and to explore, what do these events and what does it do to us? And what are the questions that are so difficult that as a society, we don't have answers to them, that maybe start to divide those of us who've been more highly educated against those who've had less education or less opportunities. But at the same time, how do we then stop having a narrative which says, oh, nobody's listening to, but that actually acknowledges we might hear it, but we might not find a way to respond to each other in a way that it can be heard. And the challenges of acknowledging what is. And that's why I love the title, Life as Is, which we'll get to in a moment. So acknowledge what is, and at the same time also acknowledge all the nuance in that and all the difficulties. And it feels that in a conversation where we can be, and we can also be focusing on our becoming, that is possible. So we might talk about things that are broader in the world, but maybe we can find the discourse underneath it. So I don't know. That was some of my ramblings.
Oh, thank you. I'll extend that a little bit, because that gave me some food for thought also. So some of the podcasts that I listen to, or generally not just the podcast, or any sort of program or show where it does seem like there is a topic, and then there is an idea, there is a perspective which is being shared. And if I can go through the underlying assumption is that this is the way to see at these things. This is the way to understand this particular topic. We are telling you, and you are receiving it. To me, that's okay. But I think that's almost like half of what we are being presented. So it's like, say, politics or whatever, and we are presenting always one side of the view, either you are left leaning or right leaning, and then the audience would also be either left leaning or right leaning. So it's just, in a way, slowly it becomes an echo chamber. And to me, I always felt like echo chambers are limiting in letting you grow. And yes, we all love to be in the company of like-minded people who think just like us, who look just like us, and who do things just like us. Wonderful. However, I think if we keep doing that, then we keep being who we are forever. And my growth happened, I have been growing continuously, because I have been deliberately putting myself in the company of people who don't look like me, think like me, or do things like me. And I think I have been more deliberate than a lot of people in my peer group, but I can also see the difference. I have a wealth of different perspectives. So I think what Sytske and I would aim to do through this Life as Is program is, it's not catering to left or right or even the middle. It's a conversation about life as it happened to her and to me and to others. And we would like to invite you to come along and disagree with us if you like, or just give us a new angle that we both haven't seen. And wouldn't that be wonderful for all of us to grow through that and see, oh wow, I was thinking it could be X or Y, and you are also giving us the Z. And I think that would be one of the things that Life as Is would, if we achieve, then that would be our success.
Mm-hmm. So I think that brings us to our title. So Life as Is our title. So what do we mean by that? What is it? Anything you want to say about that?
You go first. I would like first. Yes.
So we've had so many iterations of this, right? So we had a whole list. You made a whole list, to be fair. And I think I love the idea of having our initials in there. You'd originally started with the essay show, and I wasn't comfortable being first for two reasons. A, because it also felt like alphabetically it wasn't right. A comes for S. But also because you were the one who brought it up, so that didn't feel comfortable. What I loved is when we came to Life as Is, and it was Life as It Is, and then I thought maybe Life as Is even shorter. Is it's got our names in there, but it's got a function, so AS, but also as, and it's about life. And so it doesn't constrict us it has to be about development. Yes, we'll have a developmental lens because that's how we look at the world. It doesn't need to be about organizational development. It doesn't need to be about our studies. It's about life. So it's really broad. And I once wrote a blog post called Being with What Is. And I love this sense of things happen, they are how they are. And as Viktor Frankl has said in his work, what's important is how we respond to that. How do we choose to respond to whatever happens to us? Not to be judgmental about that so much, but to know that we've got choices, we've got options. And given our options, we can go one way, we can go another way, we can grow, we can fall back. So the reality of Life as is really what I loved when that came up as a title. And I'm excited to see what Life as Is makes possible for us.
Yeah, that's wonderful. And I think you always kind of sow those little seeds for me to pick up from there. And to me, as I think we had also had a conversation, so the entire philosophy or psychology underneath the vertical development is that all of us, we don't see life as it is, we see as we are. So that's the idea, that we all have different lenses at different stages of life or different stages of awareness, and we see life through that lens. And then I'm also a yoga practitioner, and yoga philosophy or yoga text says that yoga is a pathway that allows us to eventually, not, it takes a long time, sometimes multiple lives, to get to a point where we begin to see life as is, meaning without the lens, or we continuously refine the lens through growth, through understanding, through multiple perspectives. And then eventually we actually reach a point where we see things as they are. So in simple words, the way I understand, without taking it any deeper, is seeing things as they are without wishing them to be anything different. And I think that brings that sense of acceptance, and not surrender, not giving up in any way, but just seeing it for what it is. And the moment we see it for what it is, it just gives us the way out of it if we don't like it, or to be with it if we enjoy it, things like that. So I'll just give you a very simple example. Say if I'm working in an organization and my manager is not helpful. I know that my manager will never give me a credit for my work or promotion or whatever I'm seeking in that situation. So we have two options. Either we keep fighting. Why is she not or he not giving me promotion? Why are they not appreciating me? Why? So I can live in this perpetual why, wishing it to be something different. Or I could just say, I am working in a situation where my manager does not appreciate me, will not appreciate me regardless of what I do. And just be with that understanding that this is your situation. And the moment that dawns upon me, then I realize that, okay, then I have pathways. I could change my manager, I could change my organization, I could change my field of work, or I could just live with this idea that I just keep doing my work without being appreciated. So I feel like between the two options, the latter allows me more options. So that's what we mean by life as is and seeing it as is. And hopefully through our conversation, we'll bring those examples and we bring those ideas to you as well.
Yeah, I love that. And I love the options it gives us. And the realizations that, sometimes life is great. And sometimes it might be great, but it doesn't feel that way. So how do we actually accept that? And that notion, and this is why I always say you're so much better at explaining the vertical development than I am, that yes, life is as is, and we experience it as we are. So I love that. So I think we've already been saying quite a bit about why we're doing a podcast. Anything else you want to add to that? And I'm not going to start off now. I'm really going to let you start this.
I think to me, and I think you would also agree, Sytske, we are the people who are just passionate about expressing ourselves, about communicating, connecting, and these are not just words for me. When I'm saying that, it just sounds very cliched that I love connecting, communicating, engaging, all this, throwing all those words in there. But I definitely, like within my heart, I'm almost 50. And I remember as a little girl in school, my best moments, like academics were also something I loved, but more than anything, my best moments were when I was on the stage with a mic and I had the audience and there was a topic, or I'm doing a poetry or a debate or even emceeing events, like I'm there. I just loved this idea of whatever I'm learning, whatever I have, I should share. The just simple act of sharing gave me joy. And I feel like we are so lucky in this world now with the technology that I'm living in Doha. I could be living in Australia in a few years, or I could be anywhere else, Sytske, living in any part of the world, coming together and sharing it to people in any part of the world. And to me, my stage has just grown bigger. To me, my topics have just become manifold, and to me, I have just become more able to share. So, it's in this vein that I would love to do this podcast. And I thought it's much better to talk with someone than just talk to someone all the time. And dialogues are better than monologues, and conversations are even better. So I think in that vein, for me, that's why this podcast is so special.
Yeah, and for me, that resonates. So I did a podcast on my own. I have to be very honest. I did it on my own at the time because I thought that was going to be much easier, right? So I didn't need to find guests. So I was thinking about would I invite guests, and I thought I'm not going to be organized enough to do that. So it was very easy to just do a podcast series on my own. Um, and I did miss at the time, it did feel like I was, as you were saying, just talking to people. Sometimes I would get responses, and that was great, and I could speak to that. But it was still more talking to people than talking with another person. So that's what I love about this. I also love, and we've spoken about this, the idea of sowing seeds. And I think if I look at my growth trajectory, where I am now, I got there through conversations with people, through learning from others, through people telling me a story that at the time made some sort of sense, and then years later made a different sense. I very much recall what one of the tutors at my master's in organizational analysis told us, that he said that someone had told him 10 years after the fact, oh, what you said in that session now makes sense to me. And I've heard more stories like that. And I think that for me is so powerful. And so who knows, we might sow seeds for others or for ourselves. It may be that in 10 years' time, I will say, oh, remember what we talked about then? Now it's making more sense to me. And someone else might get that as well. And of course, that's our hope. And I notice that while on the one hand, I feel we've got things to share and things to invite people into, on the other hand, I notice this part in me going, oh, isn't that arrogant? And it might be. And if people don't like it, they can choose not to listen. But I hope it'll bring them some joy, some interest, some curiosity, and some other thinking. And that thinking might also be violently disagreeing with us. Sometimes I learn by listening to a podcast and go, I really, really disagree. And why do I disagree? So any of that, I think it's a little spark of dialogue in the world between two people on different continents who've been on different continents than that even, and learned through that.
And I think this also brings a point that I love about vertical development is the way we grow. There's so much similarity among humanity. We can talk about humanity because we are the ones talking and articulating. We can't talk to other things or other beings. Is that regardless of our culture, like you and I, we were brought up in such different contexts, right? Different background, different language, different way of worshiping, loving, thinking, everything. However, what I love about this theory is it brings together the humanity in the way that, look, regardless of where we are, this is how we grow. And we all grow in a similar fashion. So at each stage, we have a completely different way of looking at the world. And then we move on to another stage, if we are lucky enough to keep growing. And I have also noticed, and through my PhD research also, we found the same thing, that regardless of our cultural background, our economic background, regardless of how different we are, we see the world in the same way if we are at the same stage. And to me, that's just a shared humanity that blew my mind. And I want to share this. And I know, Sytske, you use this word time and again, that your internal voice questions if it's arrogance to be able to share things. In my mind, I feel like it's just multiplying joy. It's not coming from arrogance. It's coming from let's make more friends, and and how do we connect with more people? And I have almost become, and I can say this without any tinge of arrogance, like become professional in making friends at unique places in different circumstances and through disagreement. And and that's how we touch each other when we disagree, and we are friends and we can respect each other, because disagreement doesn't mean I disagree with who you are, you know. And I think in our world today, the polarity that we are seeing, maybe the polarity always existed, but we can see it more because of the social media and what have you. So, you know, if we can sow a little seed of, look, you know, this is a part of our shared humanity, and if we can draw that context within which we have dialogues and conversations, I believe we'd be adding a little bit to it, you know, to making a more graceful, more compassionate society. And I don't think that's arrogant at all. If we can, we should. That's my perspective.
And you've just given me an idea for a next episode, because I just this morning read about a researcher who wrote that actually, if we look at opinions, there's, at least in Europe, there's not more polarization, but somehow we are experiencing more polarization, and apparently it's specifically, and I'm hesitating, not because I don't know what to say, but I'm struggling a little bit with the word because I don't like it as much, but more highly educated people, so more university educated people are seeing more polarity. Now, the person who I was reading the interview with, who's done a PhD on this, and I'll need to find if there's an article that we can read about this, I found it was a little bit judgmental towards the highly educated people, as she called them. And I thought, actually, you could look at it in a different way as well. And I wonder if we look through a developmental lens, if the fact that more of us potentially are now in an expert stage means that we make more differentiation between, so the opinions may not have changed so much, but the way we hold them may have changed. So I'm really curious about, at one point, exploring that. I think, importantly, if we think about what to expect, we've been both mentioning this word vertical and vertical development. And the first thing we're going to do in the second podcast is give more of an insight into what do we mean when we talk about vertical development? What are the different stages? How might you look at yourself and discover any or more of these stages in yourself? From there, once we've shared that lens, we'll take that lens and look at different topics through that. Is that anything else you want to say about what people can expect from our podcasts? Yeah. And I think to say we will be sharing also, there's other resources, there's other knowledge about vertical development out there. So we've both studied with different people about vertical development. We'll be sharing resources for anyone who's further interested in that. And of course, it'll be our perspective on that. And other people may have different perspectives on that. But it's our lived experience and our learning that we will be bringing into that.
And I wonder if we could actually do an episode or two episodes where we interview each other through, you know, and just to give the exemplars of what each stage could look like, or maybe just to even begin with, when we are interviewing, we could just parse out some of the replies, responses, and say, well, so she said this to this question. So my estimate would be that she could be reflecting some of the attributes of this stage. But if she was at the earlier or later stages, this is, and I think that would be wonderful, just to kind of like, you know, just like I talked about religion, you know, the demonstrated religious practices, and what does that mean, and how I saw them before and how I see them now. And I think some of those things I hope that people would relate to in their day-to-day practical sort of examples of what vertical development looks like. So we all be living in one family and completely seeing the whole world differently. And what does that mean? Like once we start to understand that.
And I think, what does it mean for how we work in organizations, how we work together? what if the dominant culture in an organization is at a particular stage and we're at a different stage? Or what if we're working with a manager who's at a different stage, or an employee who's at a different stage? But also, how do we really capitalize on all the different things we get from those stages, knowing that if we grow through a stage to a next stage, we still keep all the good things that stage brought? And how do we use that in our organizations? Not just because the word vertical often gives people a sense that, okay, so if we've developed to a later stage, or sometimes it's called higher, which I think is not helpful, but if we've developed to a next stage that's more worthwhile, and at the same time, we might need to go back to connect with people, we might need to go back to do a particular task. So how do we bring all those facets of ourselves in, and see how they give us a richness in perspective, a richness in learning and understanding what's happening, rather than, there's one answer that would be right, and that's at that stage, and so we all need to get there. I think that's also the beauty of developmental growth. We can all grow, and we can also choose not to. So we have choices even there.
It depends. If our environment is pushing us to grow and we are resisting, then that could be a challenge. But we'll see, we'll see through those. And I think what would be wonderful is just giving me some ideas for the episodes is we could really ask questions to each other, and we could then answer based on how I think about this issue today and how I did before. And I think in that we can show the growth, we can show the development. And of course, I'm limited to my stage, to my latest stage. So Sytske can take it from there and she can talk about her experiences of the later stage. And I think in this way, we can cover a lot of the developmental spectrum for everyone. And I'm really, really hoping that people find themselves somewhere along that spectrum, and see the beauty of each and every spot on that spectrum. I think they're all beautiful. But what I think, and this was the question that my PhD examiner grilled me, and he kept harping upon me. He really wanted me to say that, yes, development is good. And I said, look, development is good, and the later stages are better if that person, or if people are dealing with complex issues, then later stages give them more ability to manage complexity. So it's like having a toolbox. At earlier stages, we have three sets of tools, and then slowly we are growing our tools to do different things. But it doesn't mean that the tool I have at the earlier stage doesn't work. It works for that particular task. So in that sense, I feel like as we grow, we just acquire new tools, and we do more things, and not all of us have to do more things, and that's the beauty. And I think what has happened to me personally through this, having this developmental understanding, is having more empathy. So in a nutshell, I can say I am becoming, as a person, I'm becoming more compassionate and more empathetic, because I can understand a lot of people's journey a lot better. Yes, people who are more ahead of me in this developmental curve, I may not understand them. So when I don't understand them, I sometimes take this liberty to presume that they are at a more advanced stage, and I'm maybe not understanding their perspective, but still very curious to take that perspective on board and wrestle with it and see it. So in that sense, I may come across as glorifying this whole developmental thing, but I have gained a lot. And so this is my endeavor, along with Sytske, to also share. So when we receive, I think it's our duty to also give. So in a very philosophical way, that's how I see our podcast.
And I think just to, it's both a caveat and a reality that I may have scored at a later stage than you scored. And at points, I may be in that stage and act from that stage. And then something might happen, and I might respond from a much earlier stage than you do in that moment. So it's very fluid and it's impermanent. And, and there's a part of me that I don't know if this is true actually, as I'm saying it, but as I'm thinking about it, then sometimes I might beat myself up even more or as much if, I'm acting either within that stage in a way that's not helpful, or I regress to another stage and use that stage unhelpfully because each stage has helpful attributes. But if I go into I know how it should be done, and use that as a tool to make people feel less good about themselves, not consciously, not because I wanted to, but just because I wasn't dealing well with something that was going on for me in that moment. I might be at a later stage, but actually I might be abusing the later stage, and I might even say, oh, well, this is how it is. So there's something about whatever stage I'm in, not using that as an excuse. And whether that's a later stage or an earlier stage, we are human beings. We're imperfect, and we make mistakes. And sometimes people will experience that I can hold that complexity, and sometimes they might wonder why I can't. So I think that's important as well. So I think what I loved in what you said and what I loved about vertical development is that it helps us understand where we are, and it helps us understand what is possible now, what's harder maybe to see, everything that we've already gone through that's helped us get to where we are. It never makes us perfect. It always keeps us human, and it's one way of showing all the ways in which we can show up and in which we perceive the world, and why we get so frustrated with a particular thing, or why we think that's the absolute right way and there's no way to challenge it, while knowing that that's a snapshot of how we show up as humans.
What's the next one we need to talk about?
That was it.
So I think we probably have done episode 1.
Yeah, I think so too.
Good. And now take the snapshots and
I'll just take a little pieces out.
Yeah.
So all we probably need to do is have an ending where we say something like, if people already have questions, how they would be able to reach us. We probably haven't thought about that, so we might need to record that later. I think actually, if we leave it as is, what I can do is edit this to be episode 1 minus the
outro.
And then we do episode 2, and then probably we have a better sense of what we want to do as an outro, and we can record that after, right? Because that's then just
just say it, like what would be your what could be or should be an outro.
So an outro could be something like, thank you for tuning in. We hope you've enjoyed it. We have, well, whatever, so 2, 3 requests and an offer. So a request might be, if you like this, please share. If you like this, please subscribe, so the next episode will show up in your feed. And if you have any questions, that might be the offer. Please contact us here and here, and we will take those questions into one of our episodes. If you have any questions or suggestions for what you would like us to talk about.
Yeah. So why don't you just
something like that?
Maybe write it down. I'm just thinking like, should we say these things, or should we are you also thinking of music?
Yeah, that'd be nice. I think it's good to also say them though.
Say it, yeah.
Yeah,
Say it. Okay.
we can write it in the video.
Yeah, because I'm thinking if we write it in the end,
As well.
no one's waiting. No one's going to wait for to see it. Yeah, so just maybe write down what you have said,
Yeah,
and I'll look at it. You look at it, and we just say
yeah,
it. So whoever ends, and we can take turns each time, so that it
yeah.
doesn't look like the same thing.
Yeah, exactly. And it's just it's something short like if you like this, please subscribe, and please share is what the other could say. And then remember, if you have any questions, comments, topics you'd like us to look at from a developmental perspective, please share. And they could even share that just in the comments section, and we could read
Yeah,
those.
yeah. Maybe for the first episode, we can't say from a developmental perspective because again, like
Yeah.
people like it wouldn't mean much to them.
Actually,
Um,
the first episode, we might not say any of that. We might just say, so we hope you enjoyed this,
yeah.
and we look forward to seeing you in the next section, which will be about, which will give some more meat on the bones to what is a developmental perspective.
Yeah. Okay, so why don't we just do it? Why don't we record it? So
Yeah,
that
good.
so it's done. Yeah.
So, me do it, you do it?
You do it. You do it.
Okay.
I don't mind at all. Yeah. Because I know like you do it really well. So just sum it up. The first episode you do it, then we'll just take turn.
So thank you for being with us for this first episode. We've really enjoyed talking about what we're about to do, what life as is, and a little bit about who we are. You'll no doubt get to know us better as we go through the next episodes. If you like this, you can already subscribe, and that means the next episode will come into your inbox naturally. And if you'd want to share, we would really appreciate that. Now, the next episode will give a clearer background on what is what is a developmental perspective, what is vertical development. So anything you want to learn about that will be in that episode. And from there on, we'll also give you an opportunity to ask us about any topics you'd like us to look at with a developmental perspective, or any questions you have, or maybe even challenges you have that you'd like a different perspective on. We look forward to seeing you in 2 weeks in episode 2. That's
Thank you
it.
for tuning in, everyone. See you again.